Wonderful, fantastic, dreamlike. First is the magnificent surrounding. Of course, we're in the mountains. I'm an Ironman, ultra-marathoner, so for me to be in the mountains is just fantastic. The food is wonderful, people even better, and the whole week was organized. Since we have COVID-19, we're all vaccinated. That's why we can have no mask. We also still took precautions. We were outside most of the time and not in the room. So we did to exchange. We basically bike and run and walk in the nature. So it was just wonderful. I love this concept. The Italian has this concept called genius loci. And so it's basically, they have a lot of richness in terms of nature-based, richness, nature capital. And what they do, like, you know, we all know Parma, the Parma cheese, and we all know prosciutto, which come, and then we went to San Daniele last night, and that's the San Daniele prosciutto. And so they have these appellations d'origine, so they do put the culture of the local area into the products and the service, and so I find that fantastic. I think we need more of that because the world needs more to be grounded into nature. We've lost that connection, and I can't remember. I think it was the second night we went to the Agriturismo Center. So this is a lady, a local farmer that decided to have, you know, take over with her parents the farm, and then now they have rooms, and then they produce whatever 80% of what they serve. I think it's a great model of what nature-based economic development looks like. So first of all, I'm a Miss Sustainable Development Goals, right? Because I was privileged to be the coordinator of the Sustainable Development Goal negotiations from the non-state actor. All of our governments negotiated them. So 193 governments, the Italian head of government, the Canadian, the US, the UK, Malawi, Togo, whatever. They all were at the table negotiating. But we also build on the collective wisdom of crowdsourcing, and we basically have, my job was to facilitate the coordination of the voice of women's group, children's group, indigenous people, farmers, unions, local authorities like the cities, as well as the private sector. And so it was so enriching, and that's why the SDGs are so ambitious. I'm convinced it's because we have the collective wisdom of using digital, you know, online sources, and we were able to connect the entire world. And we have input point from not everybody, but from NGOs, groups, women's group communities from around the world that fed into the SDGs. So we have way more ownership of them. They're still not known enough, but they're way more known than the MDGs and others. And actually, it's the first time that humanity has a set of common goals for the whole world. And so for me, these SDGs, and people call them the UN SDGs, but I call them the people's SDGs because they belong to each one of us and all of us. Because we just published a book in French on the 30 myths about the SDGs. Because people think, oh, well, this is like the international organization, has nothing to do with me, or it's too costly to achieve the SDGs, or that's the role of government, that's not my role, I have no role to play, and all of these are wrong. So basically, the SDGs are a common set of goals. They're very ambitious, they are aspirational, and government alone even admit within the document at the UN that they all sign that government alone cannot achieve them. We individual in the community level, and then at the community level, the local, the regional level. Yesterday we had a gentleman here that worked at the University of Udine in agricultural economics, and he's part of the group of universities that actually are part of the consultation where Italy developed its voluntary national review. That's the way government look at the 17 SDGs and the 169 targets, and they say which one we're going to prioritize. And then when they do that, they say, oh my God, we can't deal with 17 goals at once, we need to cluster them. So they cluster them, but to cluster them they need to look at the targets, and then that means you need to look at the interlinkages between each of them. So you can increase agricultural production, but if you do it in intensive agricultural production, you're going to increase pesticide and nutrient into the water, so then people don't have clean water. So now you advance SDG 2 and you reduce SDG 3 and other SDGs, right? And so it forces government, but also what I like is that it's the principle of subsidiarity. So you lower the level of decision making to the lowest possible level, so they're global goal, but you can then adapt them to the regional level, and you can adapt them to the local level. So, and you can adapt them to the community level. So a little community where we are now in VALBRUNA can decide, okay, these are our priorities, these are the targets we're going to focus on, and develop a plan, and importantly, Patty, you know as much as I do, a budget that goes with it, and then involve all of the stakeholders to get there. And that's the value of the SDG. They're kind of a North Star to basically say, okay, this is where we all gonna be heading, and we want to get there by 2030, but what is it I can do now? And then involve the whole of the stakeholders to get there. So in this region, what I see is a lot of natural resources. It's very rich in natural resources. Wood, you can see all these beautiful wood that are used to make wonderful music instrument. You have a lot of agriculture, so they produce apricot, they produce corn, soybean, they produce kiwis, they produce a lot of wonderful food. So prosciutto is produced in this region, and so they have all of this richness, and the question then becomes, how do you ensure that this lead to inclusive, so everybody is included, as a decent job, as paid a decent wage, nobody's left behind, so we don't leave the poorer people, often the migrants or the ethnic group, aside. You include them in the economic regional development, and it's done in a sustainable way, in a way that respect nature, and even better, could improve nature by recuperating soils, or to have more fertile soils. Sometimes we've degraded our soils, or the water streams, or the air quality is not an issue. We've all breathing is wonderful air. So this is, for me, it's so powerful what a region like this, and here what we've been focusing on, that NanoValbruna, is the most precious resource that we all have, our children's. The upgrowing generation, their mind, and what we find, and that we did an experiment at George Washington University in the business school on entrepreneurship, and once you introduce early on these entrepreneurs to the concept of the SDGs, they basically come out with their degree social entrepreneurs, and not social entrepreneur in the sense of, oh, I'm gonna do good without making money. No, making money while doing good, and it's automatic, because the problem we're having is the lack of awareness that they exist, that there are business opportunities in them, and that each one of us can take advantage of these business opportunities, and in doing so, basically making the world better, our community, our region, our country, and the entire world. It's funny because a lot of people are doing the SDG, they just don't realize it, right? So I'll give you an example. On Tuesday, we went to this agroturismo farm, right, not quite sure which direction it is, but it's up in the mountain, it's gorgeous, and it's in the soundtrack forest. It's along the path of the soundtrack forest, which is another area that is wonderful, because what they did is, so for the agroturismo, so it's tourism related to agriculture, local agriculture. Again, we go back to genus Loci, right? So what are the richness of this area? How could we develop tourism around it? And you know, with COVID-19, tourism is down 80% in the world. I mean, it's been crushed by COVID-19. And so what they did, and I find fantastic, is that woman and her parents got together, and I was mentioning the farm, but it's more than that. They produce 80% of the crop, but for the rest of the crop, they buy from local farmers, which create economic opportunities for these other farmers to sell their product to this farm. Along the path, when you go towards that farm, that agroturismo farm, you actually have World War I casernas, like the fort that they built, the Italian and Austrian for World War I. So for us coming from America, of course, like, whoa, you know, vestige of World War I and World War II. So it's always interesting. And all these people were staying in the mountain and how they protected the mountain and the valleys. And then at the same time, you go there and you really get the woman is like, you feel like you're welcomed by a family, because it's the whole family. Her daughter works there, she works there, her parents work there, but they also create economic development opportunity for the rest of the region. What would be really good, and that's what people are trying to do now, is to develop an agglomeration, because it's easier if you have several of those areas. So if you're planning to travel to Italy from Canada, you say, oh, I want to go VALBRUNA, and there's 5-6 areas I can go visit, and it's going to be several days. So that's one example of where they're doing SDGs. But I'm telling you, if I was to ask the lady, is she doing SDGs? And she will be, no, I'm doing great work for the region and for my family, but she's doing SDG 2, Sustainable Agriculture and Food Security. She's doing SDG 8, which is decent job creation. She's doing also rural development, and they're doing sustainable tourism, sustainable consumption production, which is SDG 11, and they're protecting the nature around them, which is another SDG. So it's and probably sequestering carbon, because they're very sustainable in their operations. So that we didn't have any plastic there. They're really careful. So that's one example, local. But what I find interesting also about Italy is that the COVID-19 has shown how interconnected each of our countries are, and developing countries are really, really hurt by the COVID-19 because their economy was shuttered, because trade stopped, tourism stopped, and a lot of countries are dependent on tourism or commodities. Commodity prices decreased, tourism pretty much shut down. So these developing countries do not have a lot of opportunity, and foreign direct investment went down. So the way the Italian government actually, as part of the National Voluntary Review, they decided that the aid, each one of the developed countries have bilateral aid. So they developed this project with developing countries, and to help them to catch up with developed countries. And what the Italian Foreign Affairs government ministry did is to say, why don't we put a pot of money for the Italian business, if they want to develop business opportunities that would be aligned with the SDG, that create decent jobs, that are providing sustainable food or water or electricity for these communities, we're going to put a pool of money that they can draw from. So it's we all have export agencies in our country, but this is even better because it's aligned with the SDGs and it's providing entrepreneurship. And imagine the power of having a joint venture between an Italian company that has a lot of knowledge about this genus loci and developing the culture and the value into the product, and going to a developing country with an entrepreneur that really know their market and their institution, and the two come together to develop a market. So they're developing a niche, a business opportunity. It's creating jobs, it's creating economic growth, and on top of it, it's advancing the SDGs. And it's giving an aura to the Italian in terms of the world of the Italian is actually helping the world, because we don't think about it often, but the way we trade, the way we do investment, the way we solve sovereign debt issues has a huge impact. It's a macro systemic impact that affect a lot of the local decisions. And so it's very important because some of the best countries in terms of SDGs, in terms of eliminating carbon emissions, to sequester carbon, to reduce pollution, to have good, decent jobs. Sometimes they're the worst in terms of their trade policy that prevent developing countries from developing their own market and be able to create the fiscal space to be able to invest in their market, and then have people have access to electricity because they can pay for it, right? So we need to think both at the micro level, at the meso level, and the macro level if we want to solve the SDGs. And that's what I find fascinating, working at the UN, based in New York, where we get 193 governments that come together and negotiate, but it's very much at this level. And then when you have a chance, like we did this week, to come here and be at the micro level, very micro level, and connect the two, this is where the power and the magic happen. me and you, when we try to look at our pension fund or our private investment, we try to decide which company we want to invest in, or which green bond or investment fund, it's really hard to know which one is have a real impact and those that are greenwashing, pretending to have. And because we don't have common homogenized metrics that we can compare companies against. At UNCTAD, UN Conference on Trade and Development, we're the Secretariat to the International Standard on Accounting and Reporting. And there and this is an intergovernmental process, a bunch of accountants, they basically developed 33 core indicators that are not just materiality, but define what is the new meaning of being a good corporate citizen. And so it's how much water use you have, electricity, how much is renewable as part of your portfolio, but all the way down to your supply chain, of course. And decent work, and how diverse your board might be, composition of your workforce. And so increasingly, I believe that we will see a disclosure against core indicators, because right now, as you know, companies can decide which indicator they're going to report against. So they report against the one that they look good, and they just ignore the one that they make them look bad. So if we had a core set of indicators, now you can say across industry, across sectors, across the world, you can say these are the good companies, these are the ones that are lagging behind. And increasingly, if we have that, it would be difficult for those lagging behind to have access to capital because they're riskier. And then consumers could also decide to choose to buy from the companies that are better corporate citizens. So we need to get there. At the UN, we have the Financing for Sustainable Development report that the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, World Bank, IMF, UNCTAD, UNDP, we work together and we produce every year. And we're asking this year specifically for mandatory disclosure of companies. We just didn't put a date because that's harder to negotiate, right? But we're saying that we need to get there. The question is how fast we can get there, because we need to get there quick. BlackRock and State Street and the big players, they have trillions under management, asset under management. And often this is money from the sovereign wealth fund, the pension fund, who have been very conservative so far, because they say my fiduciary duty is to give you the largest return. But we're seeing that changing for two reasons. One is because there's increasingly citizen wants good company, because we're waging a war on nature, right? And nature is fighting back. But the second is because increasingly we show that the best the company do on environmental, social, and governance issue, the better the return. And so there's absolutely no reason not to invest in the better ESG aligned companies. My book, ESG is dead. Environmental, social, governance. Now we're moving to SDG, to impact. What is your real impact in terms of society on environmental, social, and economic impact? And I think it's a matter of how quickly we're going to get there. But I do think that the BlackRock and the State Street and the big guys, they see the risk coming down the road. They're trying. Right now, I think there's a lot of the money they would like to allocate, align with the SDGs, but they don't have the know-how. They don't have the bankable project, enough bankable project in those countries, especially developing countries, that they could actually aggregate enough. I think there's several ways. One is regulation. So we're seeing the EU with the taxonomy regulation they're putting in place. So regulation would be nice. I was telling you, I think earlier, that we have a sustainable stock exchange initiative where the stock exchange would be the best entry point, because public companies, at least for public companies, because they're all listed, and if they and there's several of them now that are putting as a requirement that you need to report against ESG criteria, and these are the 33 more or less core indicators. So that's the second one. But the third one is pressure from society, from us, basically saying to our financial advisor, I want to know the impact of that company. This portfolio, this that you're proposing, what's the impact? When people want, we can. I do believe we have the technology, the savoir-faire, the know-how to solve all of the SDGs. There's no reason why. We produce enough food to feed everyone on this planet. We can create jobs for everyone. We have this technical solution to providing electricity to everybody on this planet, water, sanitation, etc. It's a matter of combining the technology, the know-how, and the financing. and to have the skills, the right skills together. So we need to work together, and increasingly we need to have several partners to get there. And I'll give you a specific example. For example, in the past, right, Pakistan would go to the World Bank, ask for $100 million loan, and basically just build a coal-fired plant, develop the grid, and basically connect, and then people have electricity, right? But we know these are stranded assets now. So basically, it's cheaper to do renewable energy, distributed solar panel for a little village, or wind power. But to develop those technology, you can't just go to the bank, because these are small entrepreneurs that will basically have one of them is going to have the technology. You need to work with the local NGOs that know the institution around. You need to work with the local government, the national government, the regional development bank, and maybe the World Bank and the UN. And so you need to have all these people, and then you need to form ideally women in the community that will be able to maintain the line and the services, collect the money, and to ensure that you have. So it's much more complex. So we need to work together, and the beauty of it is we know how to work together, and people want to work together. I would think where I get frustrated is people, instead of trying to work together, oftentimes they basically just have a big ego. We all have an ego. We just need to tame a little ego and basically say, what is already existing? What can I add to what is already existing? And then work together to make something better. And I think once we do that and we put our ego aside and actually work together, this is why the UN, I must get 5 people a week that come with a water project at the UN. And each one of them, that's the beauty of the UN. Everybody wants to come and solve the world. So this is where you see everybody wants to solve the world's problem. And then my job is to say, but you can do it, but you need to work with others. So let me introduce you to X, Y, and Z, who was here last week, so you can work together on energy, on sanitation, or whatever. Sometimes people get frustrated with the UN because it doesn't move fast enough, and most people know the Security Council. Security Council is when there's a crisis or a war in a country or a human rights issue. Then the big 5 countries that are permanent members of the Security Council, and they usually don't agree because you have China and Russia and the US, and so they usually don't agree. So people think, oh, but the UN is not able to make decisions, it's paralyzed. But that's only one of the pillars of the UN. The pillar that we've been talking about is the development pillar, and now it's the sustainable development pillar, is how do we ensure that all countries on the planet can actually develop, and everybody on the planet can actually live live their ambition, be able to give education to their children, and fulfill their aspiration, right? And we can do that, and that's the beauty of the sustainable development pillar. And in the middle, there's the humanitarian. So whenever there's a crisis, we also need to get on the ground. So whenever was the earthquake in Hawaii, in Haiti, when there was the earthquake in Haiti and everything crumbled, the UN organized the hub to come and get people from outside the rumbles, provide water, food, shelter. So that's the second pillar. But people on this know more about the Security Council and the humanitarian. They know very little about the sustainable development. And in my point of view, and we're both economists, it's where the real magic happens. And there's very little money that go into this, but the impact is much larger. And so one of the goals of our Deputy Secretary General of the UN, which is Amina Mohamed, she's from the UK and Nigeria, her goal is to basically ensure that people on the planet understand the sustainable development pillar and understand that they all have a role to play. We all need to be at the table, we have to have our voice heard, but also we need to act in accordance with the SDGs. I come from a small, from a poor family in a small rural area. And, being born in Canada, I had the opportunities because we have free education, free healthcare. And I'm privileged, and I want every single girl and boy in the world to have the same privilege I have. And it's not the case right now. And so for me, that's very important because I know how lucky I am. And then the other thing is, The Sustainable Development Goals are very powerful. They're a roadmap, but then we need to develop programs to achieve them. And to achieve them, you need means of implementation. And at the UN, what that mean? That means investment, trade, data, technology, and skills, know-how, right? And so I joined the UNCTAD, the UN Conference on Trade Development, exactly the day we gavel the SDGs. Because once my job was done with the collective power of the crowd, I wanted to work on implementing them. And UNCTAD, in my point of view, is the best organization of the UN to do that. We work mostly with developing countries, which have more problems, more challenges. And so, but they're not further than our country, by the way, in the SDGs. We're terrible on, emission of CO2, but in water pollution, or whatever, plastic pollution. But anyway, so my goal was to actually help implement them. And I do believe that every time, and then everybody that has a purpose, that wants to change the world, they come to see you at the UN, at the headquarters in New York. And that is so, that's another way you're privileged, because you see the most wonderful human beings on this planet, and they all have great ideas and they bring them to you. And my goal is to bring them together so together they can solve problems. One of the reasons I came to this meeting in NanoValbruna, where Paola invited me, I met her. She's one of those people that reach out to me in New York and had this idea. And she told me that she used the BLT principle. And I'm like, okay, what's that? She said, I only invite the best, the people I like and want to spend time with, and the people I trust. And if you think about it, any project, right? If you want to get them done, even your supply chain, your suppliers, right? You're going to choose the one that provides the quality, but the one you want to work with and want to have a coffee with and a glass of wine with. So I love this. So maybe we want to use the BLT principle to achieve the SDG, but giving the credit to Paola. I had the best bosses you can imagine in the entire world. So as my advisor at McGill, when I was doing my master's, my advisor was Paul Thomason. He was a young ag and environmental natural resource economist, came back fresh PhD from Hawaii, and basically so enthusiastic. And I took one class of economics. I was like, okay, I want to do economics and science and agriculture, let's face it. But he was so passionate. So that passion about, and then especially when you deal with younger people. And then also the confidence. So I remember in the Water Department of Agricultural Economics at McGill, there was a thing for a summer fellowship at Virginia Tech, where I ended up doing my PhD. And I'm looking at it, drilling, and then going like, oh my God, I wish I could do this. And Paul came by, my advisor, and said, why don't you apply? Like, matter of factly, right? I'm like, yeah, right, you're funny. Like, I gotta apply. Like, I gotta be selected. He's like, yeah, well, you're not gonna know if you don't apply. You need to apply. So I did apply. I got accepted. I went to do my summer fellowship, and then when I decided to do my PhD, 3 years later, I went to Virginia Tech, because Sandra Beatty, she was my advisor when I was there, and she was the first woman chair of the agricultural economic department, which is dominated by male, right? And she was in the South. On top of it, she was the first and youngest. She was the youngest person to be the chair of the American Agricultural Economics Association, and I went and. If you go to UC Berkeley, you go to Cornell, you have to take an appointment a month in advance, right, to see your advisor. There was like, Sandra, can I come in? Sure, wait 5 minutes. So I knock on her door and I said, how do you do it? How can a woman be, so prominent and everybody loves you and you manage to coordinate the department and it seems to be fluid? And she said, Chantal Line, the mistake that a lot of women make is, and that was, 20 years old, and this is such great, 23, it's such great advice. She said, women have different skills than men, and we have different strength than men, and we should not try to compete with them on their own skills. We should complement them, and by doing that, they look better, and then they like you because you make them look better. And I thought that was so profound, when you're 23 years old, to hear that from your advisor. And the other advice she gave me, because at that time I graduated in 1994, 96 with my PhD, and I had 2 career path. One was a tenure track position at Université Catholique de Louvain, The other one was with IFPRI, the International Food Policy Research Institute, so international, in the Brazilian Amazon. And I had my columns, my matrix, you know, the pros and the cons, and you know, what am I going to do? And I'm going crazy. I'm like, I can't decide. And so I called her and said, Sandra, I don't know what to do, you know, these things, and blah, 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 blah. And she listened and she said, Chantal Line, what does your little voice tell you? I'm like, my little voice, are you kidding me? I'm like going crazy. She's like, relax, don't think about anything, throw that matrix away, and then in 3 days from now, call me back. And I call her back and I'm like, I think I want to go to the Amazon because this is, you know, I can always go back to Accademia. But the Amazon, you go when you're young and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, having people like this in your life, and the other thing is my mom. You know, I should have started with my mom because I come from a poor family. My mom was at the degenerative disease. So every day she was worse than the day before. And yet she was the most positive, optimistic woman, human being you can imagine. Always a smile, always positive, always. And she always said, have an education. Have an education. This is the most important thing, and such a supportive person.